We had the WB-57 crash on the runway. I need you to go continue stop time. We're going to send you back to approach to come into runway 22 so we can have you land. But right now, 17 right is not usable.
Welcome back to our channel here with Ramos Law Aviation, where we dive into and investigate recent crashes. This one's an interesting one. So on January 27, 2026, NASA's WB-57 performed a gear-up landing at its home field of Ellington Field in Houston, Texas. Fortunately, there were no injuries reported. As of now, however, the big sad part is we're not sure whether 927 is going to come back into flying status. It's far too early to tell. Of course, one of 3 airplanes, so a very, very rare aircraft to go down. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Joe LoRusso. I'm the Director of Aviation here at Ramos Law. Professionally, I wear 2 hats. I'm an ATP-rated professional pilot, and I'm an aviation attorney who handles crash cases along with our team of attorneys and investigators nationwide. And what some people might not know about me is I've been an atmospheric research pilot since 2018, so this one hits a little closer to home. As always, let's start off with the facts. What do we know? November 927, November Alpha, what we call 927, took off from its home base, Ellington Field, at approximately 10:20. It flew over the course of an hour before it ultimately landed gear up on 17 right. We know 972 performed several approaches, with at least one of them being performed as a high key. Just prior to the gear up landing, 927 was performing a normal left-hand pattern back to 17 right. During that pattern, according to ATC tapes, 927 passed a training aircraft, and it looks like, according to ATSB data, that pass occurred approximately on the left base into 17 right. Now, at the time, 927 called tower and reported gear down for a touch and go. Tower responded by clearing 927 for a touch and go.
And NASA 927, gear down, touch and go.
NASA 927, runway 17 right, wind 230 at 4, cleared, touch go.
NASA 927, clear, touch and go.
That would be the last call. According to video evidence, which has now gone through the internet, all over the internet and social media, 927 slid and sparked across the runway on its belly. A very hard video to watch for those of you who love the WB program at NASA. Now, before we narrow in on those facts and really focus our investigation, let's chat about 927. As I mentioned, it's one of NASA's WB-57s, a former bomber used through Vietnam. There's 3 of them. At the moment, 927 was the only one flying. The other 2 are still down for maintenance. Now, the WBs are primarily used for high-altitude atmospheric research, touching altitudes in the 60,000s. Now, while I personally have never flown a campaign that involved the WB, I have been fortunate enough to have flown with NASA during Camp 2X in 2019. At that time, I was flying a Lear 35 alongside NASA's P3, and we were principally based out of Clark Air Base in the Philippines. Now, I can tell you from that experience, the NASA team was beyond impressive. From scientists to researchers to techs to mechs to pilots, they were very, very tight, very professional, and very dedicated to their craft. I can tell you their pilots were all former military, and they were the definition of professionalism and poise. So it's absolutely tragic to see an accident like this happen to such a great group and with an absolutely iconic and rare aircraft in our research community. Now, diving into the facts. At this time, it's not publicly clear why the WB was flying that day. My educated guess would be that it was a pilot pro flight. That's short for pilot proficiency. Now, these flights are designed to keep both pilots and aircraft sharp for upcoming missions. Gives pilots a chance to run circuits, get familiar with the aircraft, gets a chance to ring out the aircraft for the mechs and the techs to figure out what needs to be done or what needs to be worked on prior to upcoming deployments. Now, the reason why I say it might have been a pilot pro flight is because just prior to performing a normal pattern, the aircraft performed what we call a high key approach. You hear on the ATC, 927 requests a high key, tower says report your high key.
And tower NASA 927 on the go, request high key.
NASA 927, roger, report high key.
927.
Now, a high key is typically an engine out procedure, and it involves the aircraft coming over top of its touchdown zone and then performing a continuous 360-degree turn all the way down to the runway, ostensibly with engine out. Now, the low-key position is over here. It's when you're abeam your landing spot, about to turn that kind of base to final continuous 180 turn. And we hear that called. ATC requests that 927 report the low key, 927 calls the low key, and then calls gear down.
NASA 927 report low key.
927. NASA 927's low key, gear down, low approach.
NASA 927, runway 17 right, wind 220 at 3, clear low approach.
Now, I'm not a WB driver. I've never been deployed in a campaign with a WB, so it's entirely possible that this is how the WBs approach Ellington. Maybe they do a high key on a regular basis instead of doing an overhead. Certainly from the ATC tapes, Tower seems comfortable with it. Tower isn't saying, you're going to do a what, or you're requesting what. Tower seems to know exactly what 927 is talking about with the high key, and then the Tower requesting that they be called again on the low key. So perhaps a WB does this on a normal basis. This is just them practicing. But in any event, it feels a whole lot like a Pilot Pro. So now after performing the gear down low approach out of the high key maneuver, out of the high key approach, 927 performs a standard left pattern. That's standard crosswind, downwind, base, final, and we're landing. And the intention here of the pilot is a touch and go, and that's super important. So the pilot requests a touch and go. Why do I say that's important? Well, if during that low key, the previous low key, gear down, low approach, the pilot noticed something mechanically wrong with the gear system, wasn't getting the appropriate lights, wasn't getting the appropriate feedback, wasn't getting that motion and that feeling from the airplane, that yaw when gear's coming out or something like that, and the pilot believed that he had a problem, we wouldn't see him request a touch and go, right? He would request a low pass by the tower to see if the gear is out, or if he knew that there was no chance that the gear was coming out, he would request a belly landing and make sure that trucks were standing by. In any of the videos, we don't see trucks parked on the side of the runway, ready to foam, ready to put out fire. We don't see any of that. And the pilot was requesting a touch and go, presumably indicating that he was not aware of a mechanical gear issue. Now, while on the go and after receiving his left close instruction, Tower calls a training aircraft in the pattern, speaks to them directly, and informs them that they're going to be overtaken by 927.
Career track 172, you'll be overflown by WB-57 for runway 17 right. For runway 17 left, wind 250 at 3, clear for the option. 17 left, clear for the option, career track 172. Career track 172, just want to confirm, 17 left, clear for the option. 17 left, clear for the option, career track 172.
Makes sense. WB is considerably faster than the training aircraft. So in hearing that, the WB pilot knows he's priority to the runway, and he's permitted to pass the slower training aircraft. Now, according to ATSB track, the WB overtakes the training aircraft right around the base turn. That's a busy time for a fast-moving jet. During that time, you're either in the process of configuring or pre-configuring for the touch-and-go maneuver, and you're certainly running a lot of checks, touch-and-go check, touch-and-go pattern check, depending on what checklist he had at that time. But that's a lot while you're kicking outside of a training aircraft trying to put eyes on the runway. Whether or not that came into play, we'll find out later, but it's certainly something to consider right now in the preliminary hours and days after the wreck. Safe to say, there's a lot going on. So, while on base, 927 calls tower, reports gear down. That phraseology is consistent with military operations. As I mentioned in flying with the NASA crews, generally those pilots are former military, and that phraseology is a constant that has been carried through the military into their NASA flying. Unfortunately, it's not found in the civilian world, which would be nice to have that crossover for tower to call and check gear down for airplanes coming in, but it's only found in the military world and with those operations and agency flown aircrafts that are previous military. Now that phraseology is almost automatic for these pilots. They know it, right? Gear down. And because of that, it's hard to say whether that was an automatic reflex, right? Just something that is said every single time at that specific point, or whether or not the pilot actually checked and saw gear down, performed the action to put gear down, or whether the pilot at that time checked gear down, put gear down, saw the lights that are down here on the left side in the WB, saw 3 green, and then didn't know that there was a mechanical issue. That stuff is yet to come out in the investigation, and we're going to talk about the intricacies of this investigation because it is unique. But we're not sure whether gear just didn't come out or whether there was a mechanical issue with the gear. But in any event, we know that the aircraft landed with the gear up in what we call a belly landing. Again, a very sad video to watch for anybody that is real sensitive to the WB. So what comes next? Well, this isn't a normal accident investigation because NASA operates their jets under what we call public use. Now that means the aircraft only needs to be accountable to the agency and not to the FAA. So let's explore that a little further. While a typical aircraft needs regular maintenance prescribed by the FAA, needs an FAA airworthiness certificate, A public use aircraft does not. It can operate independent of all those things. Now the origins of public use come from wartime. It allowed operators to deviate from the airworthiness certificate of an aircraft in order to outfit the aircraft for special missions, special purposes, right? Installing a camera, stretching an aircraft, all those different things. It allows them to not go through the FAA hoops. They can just do it. And then they can operate the jet under public use. Now, a lot of people think public use is a license to do anything. That simply isn't true. There's a whole set of codified regulations that entitles entities like NASA that allows them, to adhere to certain standards of airworthiness and certain operational standards. And that reg's under 41 CFR Part 102-33. And 102-33 is robust, to say the least. As I mentioned, it has requirements for agencies to establish flight program standards, maintenance programs, safety management systems, etc. It's a deep, deep regulation of what an agency has to do to operate in an aircraft outside of the FAA's requirements, regulations, and purviews. Now, it also requires agencies to build policies around an aircraft accident. They have reporting requirements to satisfy NTSB reporting requirements. They have training they have to do. They have to have a safety management program that allows them to report in the event that NASA doesn't show, or that NTSB doesn't show up in an investigation. Which leads me to this point. In some cases, depending on the agency and the type of operation in the aircraft, the NTSB won't even show up because they consider the wreck to be under the purview of the operating agency. And in some cases, the NTSB will show up, but they'll show up as more of a parallel investigation or liaison to an investigation for whoever is trained by the agency. So kind of a little bit of a ripple here with this aircraft that, in a traditional aircraft, as we've discussed on this channel, the NTSB owns the scene. The NTSB owns the aircraft pending their investigation. They won't let anybody look at it. It's theirs. And in this case, it's NASA's. NASA is the agency operator operating the aircraft, the WB-57 under public use. They're the ones who own the aircraft. They're the ones that own the scene. And then at times they'll run a parallel investigation with the NTSB, but it's entirely possible that maybe the NTSB doesn't show up on this one. So interesting to see in the coming days how that'll play out. Now, from a legal standpoint on if there were to be a civil action with this, fortunately, nobody was injured. And when I say nobody is injured, I'm speaking beyond the aircraft. So nobody on board the aircraft, we're not getting any reports of an injury on board the aircraft, and we're not getting any reports from anybody on the ground, like the WB skidding off the runway and hitting a bystander who was checking their airplane or something like that. We don't have any of that. But let's take a second and think about if we did. In those cases, we have another ripple to consider with a public use aircraft. We also have federal tort immunity, right? Federal Tort Immunity Act says that an agency operating a public use aircraft on behalf of the government has some sort of immunity from a civil lawsuit. Now, there's different ways to approach that and different procedural timings and mechanisms that you have to put in play, but it certainly provides a different ripple that at least we're not just going into a general court setting as we would a traditional aircraft accident. Because we have an agency aircraft, because we have a government aircraft, we do have to think of the Federal Tort Immunity Act, and we do have to think of whether there is actually a civil lawsuit which could be at play here. So certainly a lot to discuss with this, even though it was what appears to be a simple gear up. A lot of different levels in here, from public use to how the NTSB, how the NASA operates this jet, to what would happen if there would be a civil lawsuit. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I appreciate the opportunity to talk through these. As always, with any of our crash investigations, please feel free to comment below. We love interacting with the comments. We try and get to them as much as we can. And if there's a lot of comments, we'll do a follow-up comment video to make sure that your comments, your concerns, your questions are heard, addressed, and answered. So thank you very much for this video. Look forward to talking to you guys about the next one.